If you'd asked me 6 months ago whether the Apocryphal book of Ezra had any real value in respect of being a divine or canonical book, I would have rather said, well, better study Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, or go into the Old Testament, which is actually book 1 of the Bible, and the New Testament is book 2. It's wrong just to call them New Testament and Old Testament as if there's one different to the other. Whatever's in the New Testament is in the Old Testament. They never quote anything else, and I can prove this as we go along. But let's go on to this here. Now, the book of Ezra 2 is a really quite fantastic book, and I was alerted to its tremendous characteristics by the fact I was reading an article and they said that Ezra 2 was quoted in Matthew 24. And so what I did, Matthew 23, sorry. And so what I did was I looked up Matthew 23, and I then got to Esdras, chapter 1, verse 30. And I saw in both books the following verse: I gathered you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. And it goes on from there and literally says the same thing. But what was fascinating about this is that, of course, Ezra predated Matthew by quite a couple of centuries. Well, they were both apparently written about the time of Daniel was written about. His brother Daniel wrote the book of Daniel roughly between 600 BC and 530 BC, which is about the time that the book of Ezra to Ezra was written, including the book of Ezra that is in the Bible itself. So you've got the book in the Bible, and you've got this larger book, which is called 2 Esdra, which is made up of 2 Esdra, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's how I did it, but we just call it 2 Esdras. Now, that particular quotation, I gather you as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, was said by Yeshua himself, which is like sort of an authority figure referring to an authority book. And he quoted it, and that sort of impressed me. It sort of felt to me, well, if he in actual fact was quoting that, there's a good reason he was quoting it, because he was also trying to put an authority on that book. And there are a number of other books that are of a similar character as to Esdras, but let's deal with this one right now. Now, why I'm quite impressed with the book of Esdras, and the book of Ezra was written 600 BC. There it is there. Oops, sorry. You'll see 600 BC right there. Okay, and then it goes along, and then you've got year 1, and then you've got the crucifixion, and then you go right to the end over here, and you come to year 2011 right over here. But this is first you got 1917, which is the year of the freeing of Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire, also predicted. 1945, end of the Second World War, and then you come, of course, to 2011, which is the year we're in right now. Now, from there to there, from 600 BC to 2011, this book was known and actually read in the ancient times, but not in the current time. And to me, it's a very important book. Now, just before I continue, and I forget it, I want to just remind you about a quotation in the Bible, in the New Testament. And I'm doing this on purpose because I said to you earlier on that there's nothing in the New Testament that isn't in the Old Testament. In other words, all the quotations came from the Old Testament that's in the New Testament. So if you think there's anything different, there isn't. And I'll tell you why. Because in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, when the rich man looks across the great gap and he sees Abraham and Lazarus on the far side, and he says, Lazarus, go and tell my brethren I don't want to suffer like this. And Abraham says, son, they've got the law and the prophets. Now, that isn't from the New Testament. He isn't saying, go and read the New Testament, they've got the law and the prophets. He wasn't also saying, please note, go and see the rabbis, the priests, the pastors and everything else, because he knew how corrupted they had all become. And the same thing pertains to today. There's no difference. You have to read the thing yourself. If you want to get, if you go and prefer to go and listen to a pastor, well, this is fine. He gives you a sermon. But he should be willing to answer questions on that sermon. I couldn't care who he is, whether he's the Pope, the Bishop, or whatever. You should be able to ask that man, because that is how the old church, the ancient church, was put together. It, in actual fact, was dynamic, and people asked questions. You must never even believe me. You've got to go and check it. But I'm just pointing some facts out here, and I believe you should check them. You should never just accept what I say or anybody else says, because do not blame me when this kingdom is established. It happened with the flood under Noah, and that ark stood there all our time, and all those people sniggered as they do today. This video will get a lot of really bad publicity from people. I can assure you, I've got lots of them out there, and they're very, very rude, and they really are beast-like in some of their comments. And people have written to me and said, why don't you get rid of some of these comments? And I say, well, because I want people to see how far we've degenerated as a race of people, and how they hate the Bible, which is exactly what the Bible says. So, people have got to understand that people do actually hate the Bible, and when people put stuff out like this. Now, so we have that long period of time, and today we've got the scholarship. Now, I'm going to prove that to you as well. And that is the important point about this, because when Ezra was talking to the angel Uriel, he asked about the spiritual matters, and Uriel said to him, well, he said, if you want to know this, which is fair enough, we're going to put 3 questions to you, so that you'll answer. And if you can understand those 3 questions, or even one of them, get one of them right, that's 1 out of 3, then we can answer the rest. But if you don't understand the things you're dealing with, well, how can you understand the things a completely different way of thinking, which is the spiritual world? Because the physical world's foundations is founded in the spiritual world. And this is what he said. He said to him, Ezra, he said to me, go and weigh for me the weight of fire, or measure for me the blast of wind, or call back for me the day that is past. And Ezra said, he said, who of those that have been born can do that? You should ask me about such things. In other words, he was rightly saying, we don't know how to do that. We can't call back the past like that. We have no idea how to do that. In the last 300 to 400 years, however, we have found out how to weigh fire, weigh the wind, and call back the past. And if anybody has watched any of the history programs or the archaeology programs, which is fairly new science, although it's dealing into the past, that is a whole proof of this thing here. Because for all that time, after 300 to 400 years ago, mankind could not measure the fire. He did not, for instance, have British thermal units or joules, which is a unit of measure of fire and the energy that it puts out. And they also didn't have, the measurement for wind. They didn't know how to measure the blast of the wind. Today we have a number of measurements. We have isobars, which we see every night on TV, don't we? And in the newspapers. In the past, I don't know whether they're still doing it today, but certainly on TV, which tells you the wind pressures, etc. And you can, what is your state? You've either got a high or a low, or whatever it is. There's the measurement. So it's only now that we can do these things. And guess what else? We can now begin to understand the spiritual world only at this time. And that is why this book has become very important. And that is why when Lazarus and the rich man is talked about, the parables, we know now that we've got to refer back to the Old Testament along with the New, because there's nothing in the New Testament that isn't in the Old. I mean, if you take the book of Ezekiel, you take the book of Daniel, you take the book of Revelation, you put the book of Revelation side by side also with Genesis. The 2 books are like brothers, twins. They just actually follow each other all the way down the line. You've got to understand that there's nothing in the Old Testament. And so if you're in a New Testament church, for goodness sake, go and find the source. And if you happen to read across Lazarus the rich man, now realize that the instruction to you is go back and read those things. He didn't say read the New Testament, because the New Testament comes out of that. The foundation of the New Testament is in the Old Testament. And the foundations of the physical world is founded in the spiritual world. And unless you study these things, you will never understand that. And Daniel, as I probably mentioned earlier, Daniel and Ezra were both brothers. Both of them have books in the Bible, Daniel and Ezra. You'll find Ezra in the Bible, and you'll find Daniel in the Bible. But Ezra was given unique information, absolutely unique information. And I'm going to read what it says. Remember in Daniel, in the 12th chapter, verse 9, I'll read what it says. It says, "And he said, Go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end." So Daniel literally didn't know what he read or written. And you know what? It's the same with to Esdra. Not only did he know what they're written, the scribes that he was using were using characters which they didn't even understand. The reason that was happening because it was known that at that stage maybe those characters, it might have been Paleo-Hebrew, for instance, and maybe they're using the more modern square Hebrew, which was easier to translate in this era, for instance. But let me tell you what it says. Yeah, it says, and the Most High spoke to me, saying, Make public the 24 books that you wrote first. That's the books that are in the Bible now. You can go to see Esdra too. See Ezra, it's in the Bible. And let the worthy and unworthy read them. But keep the 70 that are written last, in order to give them to the wise among your people. In other words, they're to be kept until the end time. Why? For in them is the spring of understanding, the fountain of wisdom, and the river of knowledge. And I did so. He said, I kept them. So they were never included in the Bible, except in the 1611 Bible. And the 1611 Bible was not really well published. It was the beginning of the Bible, and it shows you the chicken collecting her chickens, the hen collecting her chickens with her wings to cover them. And that is on the original drawing of that. And you can see that. So here's an instruction similar to Daniel's, keep this till the end time. So today is the only time we can understand all this. We've got all the scholarship. And that is the fascinating part about this. So if you want to get current, because the Bible is not an ancient book. And I'm a historian, and I was pretty proud of the fact that I could mention all the ages and everything else and the dates when everything happened, etc. And then something struck me about 2 years ago. This is because I've been studying the Bible since 1964, 65. And what struck me just 2 years ago was the fact that it just came to me that all this history, whilst being important and very nice, was not pertinent to what this book is. It's a current book. And now when you start to read it, it's only today we can understand. When you've got a telescope and you put the eyepiece to your eye and you look around, have you ever tried to find the moon up in the sky? You think you've got it lined up, and you end up going around the sky and you're thinking, what on earth is wrong here? Why can't I find the moon? And then finally you find it and oh, thank goodness we found it. I've had that happen. You're looking for a particular star or something like that. And you know something? That's what this is like, the Bible. Because being an end-time book, the people back then, Daniel and Ezra, and as you can see, Ezra didn't know certain things. He made that very clear, and you know about it now. When you look through this telescope, you look up, and you suddenly tuned in to what is going on now. So when it says that people travel to and fro, and they'll be carried by great eagles, etc., that's exactly what's happening. We can only recognize it today. And in certain books it says that the traffic jostle in the streets and there's lights and everything. Now, only today we can see that. There's so much in this book. I mean, for instance, this isn't only Ezra I'm talking about. There's other books that are talking about this as well. For instance, Ezra tells us about the bottom of the ocean being torn open and churned up and huge waves occurring. Hang on a second. We only really started to understand this between the last 20 years. I remember seeing some scientists on an island saying, what happened here? There was people on this island, there was houses, etc. What's happened to them? You know what? Nobody knew what had happened to them. And then they worked out there'd been a wave. They were trying to work out what happened. But recently we've had 2 waves, 2 or 3 huge waves. 2004, Christmas and New Year. And of course, recently in Japan. And there's been a few others since then as well. So we all now understand what tsunamis are. And they churned up the sea, the bottom of the sea. And you could see all the muck coming up and all that filthy water that came up. It wasn't just from the land. That came from the wave, the bottom of the ocean as well. And there was reports of fish being churned up, is what the book of Ezra says, in various parts of the world. Men were actually scooping them up in their nets. They didn't have to fish for them because they're on the surface of the sea. And the waves roar. They roar. Now, here we are. We're at a different age now. And quite frankly, when I look at where we stand, we are in a particular age where this telescope called the Bible is focused on this age. We can see things going on in the Middle East at the present moment, which I'm 68, we've never seen before. We are seeing huge changes. Of course, one of the big things we saw in all those people who don't believe the Bible is all they've got to do is go and get rid of the Jews in Jerusalem. But that's where they are. And they said they would be at this time. The Jews have got to be very careful, though, because the prophecy also says that they're going to lose half that city. And there's going to be problems there. That's all of the Bible. What I want you to do, though, is to look at this Bible, this book of Ezra, and start to understand that it's an end-time book. And it gives you a lot of information that ties up with the rest of the Bible, like the New Testament ties up with the Old Testament. There's no argument between the Old and New Testament. I don't know how many times in the New Testament, Acts, and all these books, that it says you've got to observe the commandments. And it says that any man who tells you not to is a liar, and the truth is not in him. Yet, how many churches today say they're being done away with? Well, if the Sabbath has been done away, why was John and all these disciples still observing the Sabbath till their death? And they said so. And why were they observing all the feast days? Feast of Tabernacles, Passover, the Days of Atonement. Why were they observing all these days if they were done away on the cross? Remember, the last of these disciples, John, wrote that book about AD 95, which is what was fully 60 years after the crucifixion. But then again, even further on, when Constantine finally reunited the Roman Empire, which had been fractured, when he finally reunited that empire, he had a problem, and that was there was a crowd of guys who said they were the direct descendants of the disciples, and they caused what they call the Quaternary controversy. And they came in when he was setting up this Catholic Church and said, you want to be Christian? You've got to observe these days. You've got to observe the Sabbath, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to observe the feast days, etc. Because they were quoting from the Bible. And he just said, I'm not going to do that. Because he was trying to reunite the empire, not blow it up. Because he knew that Sunday was the day of worship for the sun. He knew that. Everybody knew that. He tried to do away with Sunday. They were going to kill him again. How many times they tried to assassinate him as it was? And it would have caused riots. Not even the Roman army could have stopped the riots occurring. Easter came from Ishtar, the goddess Ishtar. And if you go into Berlin right now, in the museum there, they've got the Ishtar Gate, which came from Babylon. It was a big blue gate. It was called the Ishtar Gate because that was to the goddess Ishtar. And that's why it was called Easter. That's another long story. I don't want to go into that. And my object here was to sort of point you in the direction of the book of Esdra, to Ezra, because you'll find it fascinating. Thank you very much for listening.